The American auto industry is a well-storied one, being home to some of the oldest and most successful car brands in history. On the flip side though, it has also been through some troubles. While dark periods like the Malaise era or the late 2000s global financial crisis may come to mind, the late 20th century had its ups and downs too. This was a time of experimentation for the big three of General Motors, Chrysler and Ford. The market was changing, and with Japanese and European brands now having a firm foothold in their hunting grounds, the American were looking for new ways to take back some of their market share. This ultimately would give rise to the new American auto brands of the late 20th century. However, none of these brands remain today. Why is that? We start with General Motors. In the early 80s, executives and designers at the company were already talking about creating some sort of revolutionary new project to set the first of the big three up for the next decade, especially against new Japanese rivals, which were importing modern, safe, efficient cars that were absolutely decimating GM's market share. In 1984, GM debuted the Project Saturn concept car. Originally, this was to go into production as a Chevrolet model. However, the positive feedback to the Saturn name convinced GM in 1985 to announce that Saturn would become its own brand, aiming to create a range of cars that were forward-thinking and thoroughly up-to-date. A brand new high-tech plant was built, and new design techniques such as bolt-on plastic body parts and space frame chassis made the cars truly modern. However, all these new ideas and proposals made getting Saturn up and running a slow procedure. It wouldn't be until mid-1990 that the first Saturn rolled off the production line. Saturn would officially launch with the successful S-Series, and unlike every other car under GM, it was not based on any common platform. The Z-body was specially designed in-house at Saturn. Every S-Series would also be fitted with the same 1.9 litre 4-cylinder engine in both single cam and twin cam variants, again designed in-house. Hell, Saturn built their manufacturing plant in Tennessee, nowhere near Detroit. For a GM brand, Saturn was very un-GM. However, critics at the time felt that while the S-Series was indeed a solid car, it was overall a little bit disappointing, with the hype GM had garnered in the 5-year stretch leading up to production not quite being met. Still, the S-Series sold well throughout the 1990s, with sedan, coupe and station wagon versions being available. Saturn would even reach the Japanese market in 1997. However, as the millennium hit, despite over 2 million units sold by this point, GM stepped in and changed everything. Saturn would see a massive model expansion, and all new Saturn models would be based on an existing GM platform. This started with the L-Series of 2000, based on the GM 2900 platform, which saw very poor sales unlike the S-Series. This was followed by the View in 2001, Saturn's first SUV, based on the GM Theta platform. In 2002, the S-Series will be killed off after 12 years in production, and in 2003 it will be replaced by the Ion, which was based on the GM Delta platform. In 2005, the cost-cutting will be taken a step further with the launch of the Relay, a mere rebadge of GM's minivan range of the time. In just 5 or so years, Saturn had gone from the quirky, unique and rather un-GM brand to just another platform sharer in GM's lineup. That initial spark of inspiration that created Saturn in the 1980s was well and truly gone, but it was only going to be downhill from here. As models like the Sky and the Aura were launched, which were just Opel rebadges mind you, Saturn was struggling to turn a profit more and more as the years went on, and by 2008 the company had reached a breaking point. At the same time, following the financial crisis, General Motors was in a perilous position. The government would eventually bail them out, yes, but as a condition, GM would have to slim down their range, which involved selling or outright killing off some of their brands. And along with the likes of Pontiac and Toma, Saturn was up on the chopping block. Originally, there was a plan for the Penske Automotive Group to buy the brand, who would contract outside companies to continue Saturn production. It's a long-winded and slightly complicated story, of which you can learn more about in the card at the top right, But essentially, after long negotiations with the likes of Renault to build Saturns for them, the Pence Group could not find a solution and backed out of the potential deal. As a result, GM announced that Saturn would end production in 2009, and all operations would cease by late 2010. Sadly, it had a fairly long and drawn-out death, losing its identity as it went, and the 2008 financial crisis was the kick in the arse GM needed to finally be rid of it. GM really knows how to kill off a company, doesn't it?
For sure, we knew people would be taking the new Saturn places and using it in ways you'd never figure or even imagine. So we tested it. We ran it 6 million miles, everywhere, sometimes nowhere.
Saturn wasn't General Motors' only foray into new territories in the late 20th century. Around the same time that Saturn was starting up, General Motors also began looking at the rapidly expanding subcompact market in North America. While GM had tried to conquer this market before, their attempts were quite shit really. So in the mid-80s, GM swallowed its pride and went to Toyota for help. Toyota was one of the Japanese brands that was making a killing in the US and certainly knew how to produce a profitable small car. The deal would be beneficial for Toyota too. With the increase in foreign-made cars across the country, tariffs and restraints were put on Japanese automakers, limiting their imports to just 1.6 million vehicles a year. Toyota probably would have managed just fine with this, but with their biggest rival Honda opening their own domestic plant on US soil in 1982, thereby avoiding the import restraints, Toyota would quickly fall behind, especially with their planned domestic factory not likely seeing completion for many years. Therefore, a collaboration with GM would allow Toyota to sell as many cars as they could. This collaboration would begin by building cars in an old GM factory in California. A lot of the output was Toyota Corollas, but some were Chevrolet Novas, which were just hastily rebadged Corollas. In addition to being quite lazy, with Chevrolet's previous small cars being such terrible offerings, the badge was all but worthless in this segment. And so in 1989, a new brand called Geo was formed to promote these cars as fresh, new, homegrown compact cars that were completely different from any Chevy from years prior, though interestingly Geos would be sold directly through Chevy dealers. With General Motors also buying shares in Isuzu and Suzuki around the same time, they now had the resources to launch a full range of varied Japanese cars under the Geo umbrella. There was the Geo Metro, a small subcompact based on the Suzuki Cultus, the Geo Tracker, a small 4x4 also based on the Suzuki, this time the Vitara. There was the Geo Prism, a small sedan based on the Toyota Sprinter, and also the direct successor to the Chevy Nova. The short-lived Geo Spectrum was based on the Isuzu Gemini, and finally there was the Geo Storm, a small sports car based on the surprisingly beautiful Isuzu Piazza, which would be Geo's sole sporty offering. By 1990, Geo had a fairly varied, if not pretty boring range of cars under its brand. But being exciting and sporty wasn't really the goal of Geo. Their cars were simply cheap, reliable, and economical. And in all fairness, they largely were. But right out of the gate there was an issue. Geo wasn't selling. Now, there were numerous problems under the surface, but largely it once again all really stems down to identity. While Saturn was able to launch with one before General Motors slowly whittled them down into a faceless entity, Geo launched not really having an identity at all. They were all sold through Chevrolet dealers, and as previously said, Chevrolet had a poor image in the realms of subcompact cars, putting Geo on the back foot right out of the gate. And really in the years to follow, not much was done to boost the Geo brand at all. New engine options and design updates would appear year by year, but as the years went on, Geo became less and less relevant. Models would slowly start to disappear, and by 1996 GM realised that this billion-dollar venture had effectively gone nowhere. The Geo brand would be quietly discontinued and merged into Chevrolet, with the last Geo badge cars rolling off the production line by 1998. However, with the Metro, Prism and Tracker all still having a few years left in their lifespans, it was decided they would continue under the Chevy brand for a few more years. The Chevy Metro would be discontinued in 2001, the Prism in 2002, and the Chevy Tracker, the longest produced of all the Geo siblings, would be gone by 2004, taking Geo as a whole with it. While there was a very conceited effort to push GM into this new rapidly expanding economy market, Geo really never stood a chance. With most of their cars being heavily based off complete rebadged versions of Japanese vehicles, the Geo version of these cars struggled to gain a foothold. I mean, why would I buy a Geo when I can get a Toyota? Plus, with the brand being held back by its heavy affiliation with Chevy, it's surprising that Geo lasted as long as it did. Another failed experiment by General Motors. Who could have seen that coming?
In the 70s, you got to know a small car company called Toyota. In the 80s, Honda. Today, the 90s begin, and we invite you to get to know Geo.
Getting to know you.
At your Chevrolet Geo dealers.
Then there was Chrysler. Inspired by GM's flashy new Saturn brand, the second of the big three knew they would have to come up with something similar to stay fresh in the upcoming decade. Unlike General Motors' Saturn brand, which was simply founded as a new name, Chrysler's new mark would end up being the final product of a number of brands intersecting, almost by accident. In 1987, Chrysler would buy out the failing AMC brand from Renault for around $1.5 billion, or more than $4 billion in today's money. Now, Chrysler made absolutely no attempt to hide the fact that the primary reason they bought AMC was for Jeep, and the dealership network didn't harm the deal either. However, due to certain contractual obligations and franchising laws, Chrysler couldn't sell Jeeps through their already existing dealer networks. Therefore, the Jeep Eagle division of Chrysler's dealer network was born, to go alongside Chrysler Plymouth and Dodge. The Eagle part of the name was to become its own brand. AMC had used the Eagle name previously to market its four-wheel drive offerings, but now it was stepping up to become a full product line. Chrysler would continue marketing AMC models, now under the Eagle brand. The four-wheel drive AMC Eagle, an early form of the crossover, was now the Eagle Wagon, and cars developed through the AMC-Renault partnership would also be brought under the new brand, such as the executive-level Eagle Premier and the mid-size Eagle Medallion, essentially just a rebadged Renault 21. It all sounds a bit complicated, but essentially Chrysler now owned Jeep, something they very much wanted, and they had a brand new mark to help them capture more areas of the market and look to the future. It was around this time that another name in the automotive industry would come into the picture, Mitsubishi. At the time, Chrysler and Mitsubishi were in a partnership called Diamond Star Motors, or DSM, a way for them to jointly develop platforms and sell them under different brands. The Eagle brand would see heavy use of the DSM-derived vehicles. For example, the Eagle Vista and Summit were rebadged Mitsubishi Mirages, the Eagle 2000 GTX was a rebadged Mitsubishi Galant, and perhaps the most remembered Eagle, the Talon, was a rebadged Mitsubishi Eclipse, of course carrying the legendary 4G63 engine. The only Eagle car not derived from another brand was the Vision, which was based on the Chrysler LH platform. However, while the Eagle brand was offering pretty unique and well-built cars, especially compared to other stuff under the Pentastar umbrella, it simply couldn't compete effectively for market share, especially compared to its brothers Chrysler and Plymouth, legacy brands with much more recognition. Plus, there wasn't really an identity at all to Eagle. I mean, what was Eagle? What made it so special? As a result, with declining sales and costly model refreshes approaching, Chrysler decided to pull the plug. Starting in 1996, Eagle models would be phased out, the Summit going first. By early 1998, the final car, a Talon, had rolled off the production line, and Eagle was dead. While there were plans to potentially bring out new generations of model like the Vision, these projects were either canned entirely or reworked to fit a different brand, the new Eagle Vision becoming the Chrysler 300M of 1999. Eagle had less than a decade on the market. and not much of an impact was left behind.
At Eagle, we believe that the best way to judge a performance sedan isn't just by the distance of a quarter mile, but also by the distance of a few hundredths of an inch. Introducing the new Eagle Vision.
Ford, as the final member of the Big Three, also got in on the new brand fad. However, unlike General Motors and Chrysler, who were aiming to retake market share in the mass market sector, Ford looked to the luxury arm of the automobile industry, a sector that had once been dominated by massive Cadillacs, Chryslers and of course Lincolns, that had slowly been eaten away at by the luxury German brands like BMW and Mercedes. This was worsened when Honda introduced the Acura brand in 1985, which would be followed in 1989 by Toyota's Lexus and Nissan's Infiniti. The Americans now held a fraction of what they once had done in their own market. And so in 1983, Ford announced a brand new badge in their range to take back what was rightfully theirs: Merkur. Merkur?
Merkur.
Now, the name is a bit confusing. Merkur was the German word for Mercury, which you Ford aficionados will of course know was the name of a brand already in the Ford range. So essentially, Ford now had two brands called Mercury. However, the German name, which was imperative to its identity, was reflective of the models it would offer. Instead of building entirely new stuff or rebadging something from the American Ford or Lincoln lineups, instead, models from the Ford of Europe range would be repurposed for the American market, a lot of which were originally designed and built in, you guessed it, Germany. Merkurs would be sold through Lincoln Mercury dealers, and Merkur's first model debuted in 1985, the XR4 Ti, which was a rebadged Ford Sierra, specifically the XR4i model. With the addition of 5 mph bumpers, different headlights and updated instrument clusters, it was essentially the same car, all except the engine. American regulations didn't allow the 2.8 litre V6 of the XR4i, and so a 2.3 litre 4-cylinder turbo was fitted, producing between 145 and 175 horsepower. The XR4 Ti was followed in 1988 by the Merkur Scorpio, of course being a direct rebadge of the Ford Scorpio, the largest model marketed by Ford of Europe. Again, little was changed apart from a few visual and safety modifications. The Scorpio was to be Merkur's main luxury offering, going directly up against the likes of the BMW 5 Series and the Mercedes 190e, though interestingly being a hatchback instead of the more standard sedan, mainly due to the fact that a sedan version of the Ford Scorpio didn't exist yet. However, despite initial promise, Merkur had only managed to get these two models to market before everything started to go downhill. Firstly was the cost. The XR4 Ti, for example, after being hand-built in Germany and then shipped over the Atlantic, retailed for $16,500, or around $48,000 today, primarily thanks to the fluctuating and oftentimes unfavourable exchange rates. Secondly, you probably saw this coming, was a lack of identity. Merkur just never had a chance to prove itself, and Ford never really made a big impression with it out of the gate. Why would anyone want to buy this German pretender Merkur when they could just buy the real thing at a Mercedes dealer over the road? These factors led to disappointing sales to say the least. Rather quickly, Merkur began to fade, with sales dropping off sharply after 1986. With upcoming regulation changes requiring heavy redesigns to both vehicles, Ford decided to cut their losses, and the XR4 Ti was discontinued in early 1989, and the Scorpio, after just 2 years on the market, would follow suit later in the same year, effectively taking the entire Merkur brand with it. Merkur lasted a mere half-decade on the American market, remaining one of the shortest lasting mass-market brands in automotive history.
XR4 Ti, the sports sedan from Lincoln Mercury that isn't afraid of a little competition. Test drive XR4 Ti at a Lincoln Mercury Merkur dealer.
Despite all of these brands being born out of a similar era, now no longer existing, they each had their own individual issues, many of which I did not cover here to prevent the video going on too long. Saturn was initially a very unique and very promising brand, but General Motors' cost-cutting measures ruined what made Saturn so good in the first place, and it became just another puppet. Geo had cheap and largely reliable cars, yes, but with little effort behind the brand to distinguish it from Japanese rivals, it was left stagnant. Eagle really didn't have a solid identity in the American market at any point either, and along with its origins being more of a necessity than a want to innovate, it fell by the wayside pretty quickly. And Merkur, well, Merkur had a little problem I like to call being too damn expensive. While it's obvious not every brand is going to succeed, it is sad to see these names come and go so quickly, and in most cases leave such a small impact. With the demise of these names sinking further and further into the past, their impact lessens with each passing year. Thank you so much for watching, with a very special thanks to Brum Brum Bryn and Thomas Bradley, who are very generously donating at the highest tier on my Patreon. Just £1 a month is an amazing help, and I also have socials, links to those are in the description below. Again, thank you for watching, and take care.